When did you get a punishment that sounded easy but was actually horrifying? As a kid, when I did do something wrong, I'd have to write a sentence 100 to 500 times as punishment. I remember having to sit in the car at a family reunion at probably 7 years old writing, "I am a bad girl," 500 times because I'd taken a granola bar without asking. Writing "I am a bad girl" that many times, repeated for minor infractions, and sentences like "I am a liar and no one likes liars," or "I ruined the day for my family," just sticks with you and becomes internalized. I'm 31 now. It's been a good 15 years since I've had to write these, but I still think them about myself. Bread and water rations. It was there to cause weaponized constipation. 30 days of constant abdominal pain specifically tailored to humiliate is a lot worse than, "Oh, bland food, boo-hoo." Standing on concrete. The World War II Germans called them Stehrbunker. Stalin called them Kishka, but it's all the same idea. A cell so small you're forced to stand because there isn't enough room to sit. Standing barefoot on concrete for days is beyond brutal. It won't kill you, but it will, slowly and very painfully, cripple you while keeping you awake for days straight. Something I actually did to myself, I needed to cut weight for a wrestling tournament in a drastic way. Because of a mix-up in weight classes, I needed to drop 16 pounds overnight. I told my coaches that wasn't possible, just pull me from the roster. But my head coach pulls me aside and tells me there might be a way, and you don't even have to work out. What you do is fill up a bathtub with the hottest water you can stand and add a bag of Epsom salt and some rubbing alcohol to the water. Go into the bathroom with a buddy, stuff towels under the doors so cool air can't get in, and then get in the tub neck deep. After 60 seconds, your body will already be screaming to get out of the water because you're overheating. I stayed in for 45 minutes, adding more hot water every 2 to 3 minutes to ensure the hell never ended. The buddy is there to make sure you don't die. I sweat out 11 pounds in 45 minutes. Afterwards, I chewed some gum that's covered in citric acid that causes salivation, and I spit out the other 5 pounds over about 2 hours. So, the narrator doesn't think this seems possible, but there were many other replies to this story confirming things like this that wrestlers have endured to lose sudden amounts of weight that don't seem medically advisable to me. Teachers who recommend that high school students do this to themselves are possibly endangering their kids, surely. Insane stuff. Peeling salted sunflower seeds with your bare hands. I had the choice between that and getting my butt beaten with a cable when I screwed up big time when I was 6 years old. I chose the peeling, and I regretted that immensely. It doesn't sound bad at first, but let me tell you, after 1 hour you just want to hold your hands in ice water. Your fingertips get sore, sometimes you prick your skin and the salt dries out your fingernails and makes them really sensitive. Not to mention that the salt creeps up your nail bed and hurts like all hell, especially if you rip your skin near your fingernails. I never chose that punishment again. Outlawry. To be declared an outlaw. Today we think of an outlaw as just anybody who breaks the law regularly. Back in the day though, it was a punishment. If you were declared outlaw, that meant you were literally outside of the law, and could claim no protection from it. If someone didn't like you, they could freely beat you, rob you, torture you, or even kill you. When the stories refer to Robin Hood as an outlaw, that's what they're talking about. It's not a romantic, heroic, swashbuckling thing. It's the state of having no claim to any legal protection at all. The king, or whoever he appoints, takes your land, and anyone who wants it can take your stuff, and anyone who doesn't like you can just beat you to death without consequence. They can also put a bounty on your head and have people hunt you to claim it. What do you think would happen if you lost all protection from the law, and anyone who brought your head to the courthouse could claim a year's salary as a reward? Having to play with chickens. My grandpa always told me when the neighborhood kid would misbehave, this was like 100 years ago since then, his parents would lock him into the chicken habitat and put some liquid or meat on his feet. The chickens would peck at his feet and he would have to flee constantly until he was too tired to, and then he would be released. Kneeling on grains of uncooked rice. Goat licking. In medieval times, you'd get your feet strapped between 2 wooden boards and they'd be sprinkled in salt or something similar so that animals, mainly goats, would lick them. Seems like it would tickle at first, but they won't stop licking. Apparently, they'd lick the flesh off until they hit bones. Having been licked by a cat for like a minute or so, I can imagine this is an awful torture. being forced to keep your arms up all the time. This was a punishment my dad enforced after bare-bottom spankings stopped working. To get out of those, I would laugh even though they hurt like heck because I knew he'd get angry and stop. I'd have to stand against a wall with my hands in the air for hours, and if they moved down, the punishment would get longer. My dad told me about a punishment that was given in schools when he was growing up. He was born in 1954, which was when you had to go to the side of the aisle of desks and squat down into the Asian or Russian squat stance, and then hold it for the rest of the class. He said it never sounded bad, but after a while your muscles and knees would lock up, and at the end of the class, in order to get out of the position, you had to fall onto your side or back to the floor to let your legs relax enough to allow you to move and use them. He told me when I was super young, but it's always stuck with me because I was so surprised that something so seemingly small would cause so much pain and loss of control. You essentially got insane Charlie horses when you dropped out of the position. You shouldn't be happy with getting away with a crime by pleading insanity. Instead of a time-definite custodial sentence, you get an indefinite custodial sentence in an underfunded and terrifying medical facility. Maybe for the rest of your life. Yay! Tickling. No joke, the Germans used this in World War II as a form of torture in some cases. It doesn't leave a mark, so it's also used in environments like mental facilities, where patients may be restrained and staff go on a power trip. Extreme cases can result in incontinence, vomiting, and a loss of consciousness due to the inability to breathe. It's also easier for the torturer to do it for a long time without it wearing away at their conscience because the victim is involuntarily laughing, so it's easy to pretend it's not that bad. Being ignored or ostracized. It might not sound like much, but as humans we need that social contact, and leave it too long, and it becomes incredibly damaging. I hate being confused for an ostrich as well, but it's very much damaging to my self-esteem, as I'm so sensitive about my big pointy nose and my knobbly knees. Jokes aside, yeah, being socially alone is a really underrated grim punishment of life. Listening to the same song on loop, then skipping parts of the song. This was a form of torture used by the CIA, and it's absolutely awful. Closing your hand around a chunk of saltwater ice and holding it there. Dubbed the Salt and Ice Challenge, where people would hold on to it for as long as they can stand, it can lead to frostbite injuries similar to second- and third-degree burns. It also essentially fuses to your skin, so if you try to open your hand, it will rip off your skin. You need to use warm water to detach it. I did this about 20 years ago before it was a thing on social media. It sucks. With the attention this is getting, I feel obligated to say definitely do not try this. Isolation. There's a reason solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. The human mind isn't designed to function in an environment devoid of stimulation or social interaction. It was cool going to Alcatraz and doing the audio tour, actually. You get to go into one of the solitary confinement cells with the doors closed behind you, and it's pitch black, and while you're in there, you hear stories from inmates, dramatically read, about what it was like and how some of them would focus their mind until they could see a tiny speck, and within that they could conjure an imaginary television screen and see moving images. It helped them to stop going crazy. Standing at parade rest without being able to talk for 5 hours. In basic training, someone got caught stealing food from the DFAC no more than 20 minutes after we'd been yelled at for people doing that. As a punishment, we stood at parade rest from 5 PM to 10 PM without being able to talk and with at least one DS watching us at all times. I don't know how to describe it, but your brain can only come up with so much to do for 5 hours while not moving. Oh, we had a guy purposefully lock his knees so he'd pass out. Apparently there are clever ways to get out of some of these punishments. I can't remember what country used it, Russia or Japan I think, but one punishment was genuinely known as the white. You'd be given white clothes, locked in a cell with white walls, with no windows and a completely white door. You'd get a light bulb on a white fixture but no light shade. Your bed and its linens would also be white, and you'd be fed exclusively on white rice, in a white bowl with white cutlery, and to drink you'd get water in a white cup. After a day or two, you'd begin to hallucinate because of the lack of visual stimulation. Chinese water drop torture. Victims were strapped down so that they couldn't move, and cold or warm water was then dripped slowly to a small area of the body, usually the forehead. The forehead was found to be the most suitable point for this form of torture because of its sensitivity. Prisoners could see each drop coming and after long durations they were gradually driven frantic as a perceived hollow would form in the center of their foreheads. You're sort of right. They were blindfolded and leaned back. You were also restrained and maybe had earplugs or rags stuffed in your ears. They removed all other senses. They'd also vary the rate of the drops. The torture comes in when you throw off their sense of time. They have no idea when to expect the next drop. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Painting rocks. A couple of guys in my AITA unit got in trouble, and the sadistic drill sergeant tried being creative with an approved punishment, which was painting rocks. As dumb a punishment as it is, the sadistic side was that this training unit was in southern Arizona during peak summer temperatures. The rocks were literally hot enough to fry an egg on, and both privates' hands ended up being covered with second-degree burns. The drill sergeant faced pretty heavy administrative action. I don't recall exactly what, but it was probably one of the most severe I've ever heard a drill sergeant receive. Waterboarding. If any of you kids don't know, there was this big debate back in the early 2000s. Some people were calling it torture, and others were more or less like, it's literally just pouring water on someone's face. What's the big deal? Now, when you put it like that, yeah, what's a big deal? Take someone, make them lay down, and hold them down so they can't move, then pour water on their face. What's the big deal? I remember one conservative radio host got the bright idea to prove live and on the air that it's not as bad as they're saying by having his staff waterboard him on air. And you know what? I respect the guy for doing this. He had a strongly held belief and he was willing to go through it to try and prove his point. He lasted all of 15 seconds before he tapped out of it, hacked and coughed for about 5 seconds, and finally managed to say, "Definitely torture," before suggesting they take a break so he could recover from that. Good on him for admitting that he was wrong. It gives the narrator a good chuckle to think about the other listeners who presumably were already minds made up that they agreed with his first point of view, and you've got to wonder whether that changed any of their minds. Most people are so entrenched about this sort of thing. When visiting Africa, we learned that some places have their own form of lethal injection for criminals, by snakebite. Committers of the unspeakable act and murderers would be forced to receive a bite on both ankles from a puff adder. After officials verified the bites, they'd be sent home, under supervision, to spend their last days with their family. Some people thought it sounded like a more humane form, but it's not. When I was around 10 years old, being forced to stand in the corner of the living room with my parents and siblings in the room and stare at the wall for hours. Kneeling in salt. When I was 16, my mother told me that if I kept my attitude up, I'd be kneeling in salt. Being a dumb kid, I was like, oh, whatever, it's just salt. Well, I kept that attitude up, and my mum sprinkled a light dusting of salt on the tile floor in the kitchen, and I had to kneel in salt for an hour. The grains cut my knees and burned the wounds. I'm 32 now, and I still have scars on my knees. I will add this before the replies come in. I know that this was not good parenting. My mum was pregnant at the time and not in a good place mentally. My sister is now 16 and has never even had as much as a slap. Just recently, my sister told me she thinks I was just a bad kid if mum did all of that to me. I told my mother about the conversation afterwards, and my mother said, "You weren't a bad kid, none of you were. I just had a temper and I didn't know how to control it." I'll admit I'm an adult now and with 2 kids of my own, and hearing her say that made me cry on the way home. I knew in my head I wasn't a bad child. I rarely got into trouble, never did substances, I just had an attitude. But I hadn't realized how heavy my heart was from the punishments. I was the first of 3 kids, I got the worst of it, and I always blamed myself. Even when I was finally over it and rebuilt a relationship with my mum, I blamed myself. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear her say that until she did. This was 3 weeks ago, and I'm tearing up just typing this. My cousin, at 10 years old, quite agile, never sits still. Once he troubled my aunt so much that she punished him. His punishment was to sit still on the bed and do nothing. No TV, no playing either on the phone or with his toys, not even speaking. No one was allowed to come to his room, so that he can't even watch others. He asked her if he could read his textbooks as he thought studying would lessen her anger, but she denied him even doing that. He had to sit completely still. Initially, that punishment seemed quite simple to me, but what impact it had on this small child was huge. This punishment tortures you by boring you, which a small child can't take. At last, he broke down crying, after which he was pardoned. Okay, I'm stretching the definition of a light punishment here by a long way, but when I heard of death by 1,000 cuts, I thought it would be someone giving you a bunch of cuts until you bled out. Painful, a bit extreme, but the reality is actually much worse. It turns out cuts is a bit of a mistranslation, and it should really be slices. The executioner slices big chunks off your body systematically, up to muscles and whole limbs, with the aim of keeping you alive as long as possible. There are a handful of pictures of the process being done, which are just about the most horrific things I've ever seen. It's kind of lost its sting from popular overexposure, but crucifixion is one of the most agonizing deaths humankind has ever come up with. Just the muscle cramps alone from staying in one position for hours is enough to put it in the running, and the constant near strangulation, competing with the pain from the nails, is probably the main draw. The white room punishment. Everything white, tasteless, no sound, room temperature kept at body temperature, if I remember correctly. Just a bed, toilet, water and food, nothing that could be used in any way to alleviate the boredom. It doesn't seem that big at first, just nothing to do for a while, but it's in truth some of the worst torture one can experience. Famine walls. This was something I'd never heard of until I took a trip to Ireland and saw them firsthand. These were famine walls, and they were built during the famine of the 1840s as a means to keep the hungry masses out of the estates of the landowners. We learned it was the usually homeless Catholics who built the walls, for a few scraps to eat. According to our guide, massively, largely pointless work projects like the famine walls and the famine roads kept the masses barely alive during the 4 years that the potato crop failed. The British rule had proclaimed that the poor had to work for sustenance and not be given charity or allowed to beg. Just think about how demoralizing this would be. Day after day, building stone walls with zero purpose just to earn your bread and soup for the day. The shocking thing is the scope of the famine walls. They're literally everywhere on the countryside as far as you can see. It's really insane just how horrifically a lot of Ireland was decimated by the English in the last couple of centuries, and how little of that is present at face value in British schooling on the old empire. They're starting to come to terms with what they did in their more distant colonies, but just how much they mistreated and massacred their western neighbours really doesn't seem to get around much in your average Brit's education from what I've seen. That farm pit punishment they used to use in Eastern Europe, where the criminal is made to stand in a pit on a hog farm for a day, which starts out empty, but then the hog manure pours in with them as the hogs produce it. I'm always shocked by the number of people who consider it better than jail when it's brought up just because it's only a day. That sounds similar to the chicken poop prison in Thailand. You'd end up with severe respiratory illness due to the ammonia. People rarely survived a month, and former inmates were left with chronic lung disease and PTSD. Your mum saying she's not mad at you, just disappointed. My dad is the king of cruel and unusual punishments. He forced me and my brother to drink pint after pint of water without allowing us to use the toilet. Made me run up and down stairs when I was 9 for hours on end until I confessed to something I didn't do. Doesn't sound bad until you actually do it. My friend once proposed a punishment for people who mistreat animals, sort of as a joke. They'd be locked in a small cell for a few days, which is then pumped full of the heavy smell of dog breath. Apparently, most people, including me, thought that sounded very light for the crime, until asked to actually visualize it. When I did, I literally gagged at the thought. Having bamboo shoots grow beneath you while tied down. In my home country, the penalty for the unspeakable act and substance trafficking is whipping, with no limit, a specific number to be set by the judge. First, they clinically clear you for the punishment. Then they get you in a bent-over pose while your butt is visible through a wooden frame. The torturer, a man in a legitimate black hood, shows up and dips a horsewhip in medicine. The medicine serves two purposes. Firstly, it helps with slight healing during the whipping, in order to allow the prisoner more lashes during that sitting. And secondly, because the medicine is sticky, it causes the whip to stick and tear flesh from the butt whenever it cracks. My teenaged cousin wanted a government or town summer job where he could work out and work on his tan all day. My uncle was angry at him for thinking all government jobs were cushy, sit on your butt kinda do nothing things. So for him, he found him a job as a gravedigger in a local cemetery. He was in the sun all day and got tons of exercise. Wrapping your fingers tightly with a thinner duct tape or anything string-like but with an adhesive for minutes, with the tip of the fingers left out. Restricting any blood flow to the tips of your fingers isn't child's play, provided you're restrained and can't do anything with the pain. Stings like heck. Parents should not make their kids eat soap for saying a bad word. It's really horrible for them. Usually the kids picked up the word from the parents, and even if they didn't, it's needlessly cruel. Silent treatment and stonewalling, especially coming from a loved one. It creates a terrible imbalance in the relationship and serious psychological trauma on the stonewalled individual. No one should ever choose this method to punish the other. Buck ragging for kids. Making a kid breathe in buck or male deer urine on a rag. It smells so bad. Everyone I knew as a kid who received it said it was their most feared punishment. Everyone who didn't said it's just a gross rag. How could 5 minutes of that be bad? Your teacher shaming you in front of all of your classmates for giving a wrong answer. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.